President-elect Donald Trump appointed key cabinet positions over the past week, prioritizing fierce loyalists for top roles. Some of those more controversial appointments, like Matt Gaetz for Attorney General, Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence, and Pete Hegseth as Defense Secretary, raised questions and concerns from both Democrats and Republicans. Dean Phillips is a Democratic representative from Minnesota, a former presidential candidate who ran against Joe Biden during the party's primary. Now, just a few weeks before he is set to retire from Congress, Phillips says he would be open to serving in a Trump administration. I spoke to him earlier this morning about the way forward for both parties. Congressman Dean Phillips, thank you so much for making the time.
Great to be with you, Rosemary.
I want to start by asking you about some of Donald Trump's cabinet appointments. I wouldn't expect you to like all of them, obviously, but there are some pretty controversial names that are raising eyebrows down there and here, too. What do you make of the cabinet so far, and what does it tell you about the president-elect's agenda?
Well, I'll tell you, Rosemary, it's hard to say I'd be surprised based on what former President Trump has insinuated he wants to accomplish, and the appetite for change amongst his base and kind of the American ethos right now. So you can imagine, I care about competency, and the American electoral system is predicated on a two-party system. So you're not always going to win, and we have to be respectful of different opinions. But I am concerned about competency. And when you look at people like Matt Gaetz, for example, Tulsi Gabbard, some others, of course, RFK being a pick for a job that typically someone with a medical degree would have, there is an issue of competency. And I think Americans and the world should be looking at that. The good news is we have a Senate that requires some degree of participation in this confirmation process. So my hope is that Republican senators will predicate their picks over competency over politics.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, the Senate process. Do you think that everyone will get through that process? I know there's talk about recess appointments. I wonder whether you think that this is about the president testing the loyalty of Republicans.
There's no question. I would encourage people to watch the dynamic between newly elected Majority Leader John Thune from South Dakota and President Trump. They've been at odds in the past. They've repaired that relationship. Senator Thune is going to want to establish his leadership capacities and perspectives very quickly. And I would imagine that would mean no recess appointments, because that would be at least a violation of the standards of the Senate, if you will.
Sure.
So, yes, you're going to see a test right away. And absolutely, there'll be a falling out between those who are kind of the pro-MAGA wing of the Republican conference and the more moderate wing that does place competency over politics. So we will see. It's going to be an interesting few weeks, and certainly those picks are very controversial. It also means that some of the otherwise controversial picks might have a smoother path to confirmation.
Right. Yeah.
The more bizarre some of the other ones might become.
I want to get to your party in a minute, but I did want to ask you about a comment you made in a previous interview where you said that if there was an opportunity to help your country, you would serve in a Trump administration. Can you explain your rationale there and whether you think it's even something that Donald Trump would consider?
Yeah. Well, Rosemary, what astounded me 7 years ago when I first decided to run for Congress is the unwillingness of the two major parties' leadership to work together. And why would a country, whether it's the U.S. or Canada or any for that matter, eliminate 50% of the universe of potential candidates for an administration? It makes no sense. And I think we should try to be working on this dynamic and encourage Republican administrations to engage some Democrats and Democratic administrations to engage Republicans. That's probably in no small part why we have such a political divide in this country, is so many Americans in this case don't see themselves represented in the administrations of American presidents. So I think anybody of competency and ability and good perspective and good character, should be willing to serve in a government and serve their country wherever it might be. So I'm trying to establish a little bit of a new dynamic that I think this country needs quite desperately.
Well, let's talk about other things that you've done to try and do that. And that was namely challenging Joe Biden during the Democratic primary and saying that you believe that he would lose in a rematch against Trump. Obviously, there's been a lot of blaming of Joe Biden for not dropping out sooner. Do you feel like your voice was ignored? Do you feel, I guess, vindicated now, even though it is at the price of your party losing?
Yeah, the truth is, Rosemary, I think people heard me, but they chose to ignore the message and they chose to suppress, those who felt the same, which, by the way, was an overwhelming majority of my own colleagues in Congress, Democrats, who recognized that Joe Biden, a good man, probably would not be in a position to serve for another 5 years and was in decline. And furthermore, every single data set that we had access to indicated the same thing, that he was going to lose to Donald Trump. So we did have time. The problem is we have a political reward system here, of course, that rewards silence and staying in line and has punishment for those who might raise their voice and call attention to a truth. And that's something we're reckoning with right now. But at the end of the day, Rosemary, competition is the answer to everything. Of course, we have slightly different electoral systems in the U.S. and Canada. But at the end of the day, we have to ensure that we have more candidates from which to choose here in the United States, not fewer. And for the Democratic Party to honor its core principle of preservation of democracy, I think we have some work to do. And Americans have a right to understand why this system is not working. And I want to shine some sunlight and transparency on the corruption that this duopoly, as I call it, has a monopoly on our electoral system. And Americans are fed up. And that's in no small part why Donald Trump is now going to be president once again.
Does that mean that you think that there is room or a possibility for a third party?
Well, I think at some point, if the status quo continues, I think there's no choice. George Washington, America's first president, in his farewell address to his young country in 1796, warned us very diligently about the risk of what he called factions, political parties. And he recognized the threat. He was the only American president not affiliated with a party. And I think that is part of the problem. Now, those two parties have established a dynamic that makes it very difficult, high barriers to entry. But that is exactly, I do believe, what every political system in the world needs. Thoughtful competition, spirited, more is better, and debate along with it. We are suppressing both.
You are not seeking re-election. I wonder what that means for you next. Do you feel like politics is not in a good place right now, that you've done what you can, or are you still looking for an opportunity to contribute to that dialogue?
Well, Rosemary, I'd like to think I'm just getting started. And until you can't fix anything until you understand why it's broken. And my 6 years, 3 terms in the U.S. Congress, quite remarkably exposed what's broken. But I'm not a complainer. I'd like to engage and not observe. I like to participate, and I'm going to. If anything, I'm more inspired than ever to both call attention to the truth and provide competition if necessary, or most importantly right now for me as a Democrat, try to help my party recognize why it has lost 2 extraordinarily important elections to a man who many around the world consider to be dangerous in some ways. With all that said, I respect them. I understand the MAGA movement. I understand why Americans are frustrated. I'm deeply concerned about his character. So I'm going to play some role in reforming my party first, and if not successful, maybe help create some competition for both parties so that Americans have another choice in a dynamic now where over 50% of American voters do not affiliate with either party because of their disappointment in the system. And lastly, we have an angertainment industry, and I'll say it again, angertainment, that would have us believe we're more divided than we really are. And as I travel the United States, I find just the opposite. Thoughtful, good people who want to respect one another and feel let down by a political system that has not been listening to them. And that is the wake-up call for American politicians, because time is short to make the reformations necessary to ensure democracy continues for years to come.
Very thoughtful, Congressman Phillips. Thank you for making the time for us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Be well. Thank you, Rosemary.